Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Suburban Homesteader, Wyoming, Arizona. This is Sandy, and we have such a fun topic tonight. It's all about recipe mishaps. And in fact, this afternoon, I did a video about how recipes are kind of like life and the different things that can go wrong in a recipe, which is so similar to life. And so I hope you check that out. It's and interesting. And if you listen to things that can happen in a recipe and relate that to life, I think you will find it very familiar. And Xander's here. And Xander says, I have teens learning to cook. That explains it. Also, a roommate who burns water. It's a process for sure. And Anne is here. Anne says, hey there, my other pea in the pot, because Anne and I are peas in a pot, I tell ya. So, interesting, fun topic tonight. And I think it's so interesting, the whole idea of recipes and mishaps and what can happen. And and Julie just popped in. She says, my grandma's recipe card for snowball cookies doesn't say to bake them. See, this is a mishap with recipes. And don't think it just happens on the recipe cards that you got from your mom or your aunt or your neighbor. It actually happens in books all the time. It used to be when cookbooks came out, a lot of times they would test every single recipe in there. And that takes a lot of time if there's any amount of recipes in a book. And so even now, a lot of times they don't test those recipes. And so if you're reading, and what if they forgot the salt? What if they forgot the lemon juice? In fact, the other day when I was telling how I was making something, when I actually put the recipe on in the description, I forgot lemon juice. And one of my wonderful subscribers sent me a message. Barbara says, you forgot the lemon juice in the recipe, in my little description. So I just so appreciated that. So I could go back and fix that. And it was a quick fix. Not like if you had a book and they have to send out these sheets, these addendums. So that's always crazy. I have an old recipe book, Sandra says, in my video, and you read it and you go, what? Oh, I have a lot of old recipe books. Some things I have to look up what the word is actually, because we don't use that word in that way anymore. And so that's always interesting. Anne has a story. When I was first married, I could only cook spaghetti and hamburgers. I did exactly burn water once. Gee. Because I've burned my tea kettle dry because I've got busy, and all of a sudden there's this weird smell, and it's like, oh my gosh, I burned all the water out of my tea kettle. It's just one of those things. But I think that the crazy thing is, when it comes to recipes, sometimes we have this purist view that unless everything is from scratch, we're not really a cook. We're not a baker. But that's just really not true. You can, what about if you want pre-cut garlic and you buy a little jar so you don't have to do that? Does it make it so that you're no longer, that cook that is from scratch? No. Like a lot of times it's easier to cook with a can of beans that's already done, like black beans, instead of going through that whole process. There's not right or wrong with that. And the Vineyard Chicks are in. Girls, how are ya? I love the Vineyard Chicks. In fact, they have a live stream at 7 o'clock Mountain Standard Time. So in 55 minutes, they have a live stream. So make sure that you check them out. They are just fabulous. I'll tell you a story. True story, completely true. Because sometimes a recipe, you think it's going to turn out the way it did when you grew up. Let's take strawberry shortcake. My dad loves strawberry shortcake. Well, when I was growing up, my idea of what the biscuit, the cake was not what was in my Betty Crocker cookbook. So I'm a young married woman. I want to have my parents over. I think my brothers came too, over for supper. So I'm baking chicken in the oven. I decide I'm going to make strawberry shortcake. Because why? Because my dad loves strawberry shortcake. So I'm going to make it. Now remember, I'm 18 years old. And I got my Betty Crocker recipe book, so I can do this. Sometimes it's all about experience and what you grew up with. So I make strawberry shortcake. Only when it comes out of the oven, it does not look like what my mom's looks like. It looks like a biscuit. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've done this wrong. And Angie is in here. And so what do? I throw them away. They look like a biscuit. And so my mom and dad get over there. My brothers get over there. We're having the chicken. Everything is fine. Everything's dandy. And I said to my dad, I tried to make strawberry shortcake, but it didn't work out right. I did something wrong with the recipe. And so I'm telling my dad, it looks like a biscuit. And so I threw them away. And he's just laughing at me. He's staring at me. And he says, Sandi, that's what they're supposed to look like. Your mom goes to the store and buys these little spongy little round cakes. That is not real strawberry shortcake. I was mortified. I threw away perfectly good biscuits. And so we had strawberry and whipped cream for our dessert. That is a mishap. It's just one of those things. And with recipes, the author assumes a lot of things. They assume you know how to cook. They assume you know what words mean. And no recipe is foolproof. There's things that affect recipes. It might be too humid, it's too dry, it's too hot, it's too cold. And so things don't rise, they don't do what they're supposed to do. It's not your fault. Seriously, it is not your fault. Because knowing and not knowing, and knowing the true meaning of what the author of the recipe means, sometimes things are left out. Sometimes it just has the wrong amount. I Googled crazy things that went wrong with recipes. The number one thing that it popped up over and over again was on the Karo syrup bottle. Do you know what Karo syrup is? Corn syrup. When you make pecan pie, you use this, right? On their actual bottle, somebody probably got fired for this. On their actual bottle, instead of saying 2 cups of Karo syrup, it said 4 cups. And so that pie would be, in fact, the writer wrote, you'd be eating that pecan pie with a straw. And you would have thought that would have got reviewed and reviewed and reviewed. Now the Vineyards chicks say, KK forgot one little ingredient in an upside down pineapple cake, sugar. That I've forgotten things that I've done the recipe over and over and over again. And you forget one of the ingredients and you go, why is this not turned out right? So what I do now is, as I go, I'm checking off. Okay, I got this in there, I got this in there, I got this in there, I got this in there. Because it just happens. I think people that write a recipe have to assume that nothing is obvious. But that's not what happens, especially if you have a recipe card from somebody. In my video today, I showed a recipe card from my grandmother. It was a recipe on how she made grape wine. Now, I do not remember that she made it this way, but this was the recipe card. I thought we wouldn't got grapes, and maybe some years that we did. So it had the sugar, it had the yeast, and it had 2 12-ounce containers of frozen grape juice. Then all it says is 34 days. Then it says bottle, and it says a balloon costs 10 cents. It doesn't tell you how to do it, what to look for. It's just crazy. Julie says that she forgot salt. She forgot to add salt in the bread. It can happen, or the recipe tells you the wrong amount, or it doesn't tell you when to actually add that ingredient. How many of you have done that? Like it used to be when I made things, I added the basil right away, not knowing, because things you learn in experience, not knowing that basil will lose all of its flavor. You need to add that at the very end. Same with if you're going to do lemon juice for a flavoring. It's better if you add it right when it's late, when you're almost done. And so it can be crazy mishaps. I think everybody has stories like that. I think we kind of think that, because you eat foods from your grandmas, your moms. They've had all those years of experience. And you think that they always could cook like that. They could always bake like that. But I remember once my grandmother told me years ago, if you want to be able to make pies, you might make the pie crust. You need to make pies every single week. Because all of a sudden, you get that feel. It's like when you're making bread and you know exactly, all of a sudden it's elasticy. But if you haven't ever done that, how would you know those things? It's just a matter, I suppose, of experience, trial and error, somebody helping you. And the more you cook, the more you bake, the more you feel it when you're doing, especially like doughs and pastries. The more you do it, the better it is. It's just one of those things of life. And it is kind of like life. One of the other things that one day I just timed how long it took for my oven to heat up to 350 degrees. Now, most ovens anymore, they can heat up to 350 in 10 minutes, 12 minutes. It doesn't take very long. But if you heat it up when you very first start a recipe, and maybe that recipe takes you a half hour to get it all together, that's 10, 15 minutes at least that you wasted of energy. Why do that? Anne says, I learned from you to leave a cut up onion out for a while before adding it. That's true. And garlic. Like I always leave the garlic also on the counter for 10 or 15 minutes. There's a chemical reaction, and it makes it so that you have more flavor. But seriously, I probably cooked for 30 years before I ever found that out, But I think you should cook what you like. Cook what your family likes. Who cares if you do it, 10, 12 times a year? It used to be that people would come to Sunday dinner, and every single Sunday was chicken, or every single Sunday was something else. And it became a tradition. There's nothing wrong with that. I think the other thing with mishaps. Oh, Julie says, when I write recipes, I try to estimate how long to preheat the oven so it doesn't waste energy. That is a great idea. Because you're sifting this, you're mixing this, you're folding this, you're creaming this. And why not wait till halfway through before you ever turn your oven on? Why not? Because I hate wasting energy. I hate having a high electric bill. I just hate it. Now, one of the other major things to make it so you don't have a recipe mishap, to me, what I think is before you start, I put everything on the counter that I'm going to use. I have all my measuring cups, all my spoons, all my, if I need a spatula, if I need a colander, everything that I need, I want out there. And for me, it is much easier if I have a clean sink. Now, it's not like I haven't baked when I had dirty dishes in the sink. It's not like I haven't, but it's very much less stressful to me if I don't have to work around dishes in the sink. And then another thing I would always say, have an extra bowl. I mean, a big bowl. Then when you're peeling or you're cutting, you're grating, and you have extra things, you just have some place to throw that into. You're not having to get stuff and throw it into the garbage, maybe open a drawer, walk around part of your kitchen. If you have a bowl right there, and it will probably make it so that you take most of those things to the compost where you might not have otherwise. So I think that is just a trick to do. And if you clean as you go, that can be helpful. I would rather have some dishwater ready so that if I needed to wash things as I go, it would work better. It's just one of those things I'd like to do. There could be mishaps because of maybe it's something too spicy, not spicy enough. So I like to taste as I go too. Tricks so that you don't have a mishap. How about soaking your vegetables and soaking your meat in salt water? It can give it a lot better flavor. So like for maybe 5-6 cups of water, you're going to use 3 tablespoons of salt. Meats I like to soak for about 12 hours. Vegetables, only 15 minutes. That's all you need. How many times have you guys been making a recipe and you don't have sharp knives? I find this very irritating, and it makes your recipe longer. It makes it so you may not do that recipe again just because you don't have sharp knives. And sharp knives are not just for meat. It's for when you're cutting up fruits and vegetables, or maybe you have to chop some nuts. And do you have a box grater? I love box graters. It's a grater. It's got 4 sides. It's got different things that you're grating, so like if you needed shredded cheese, or you want slices of carrots, and you can take the whole long carrot and just slide it down. It's a great tool to have. I think it's better to have some really good tools, a few of them, than a lot of things that you're probably hardly ever going to use. Use the ones that really help you. So it makes it so you just don't have some of the mishaps. So another thing is, what are some tried and true recipes? Maybe you've got them from your mom, your mother-in-law, your grandma's, things that have been used over and over and over again. My Aunt Grace, in the recipe box that I got of hers, on a lot of her recipes, across the top, every time she made them, she put the date. So in my video this afternoon, I show one of her cards that she started making 1984. And you can see every single time that she made it, if she made some changes. It was for a lemon pie. So, and speaking of lemon pie, what about meringue? How many people do not make lemon pie just because they don't want to make meringue? Because sometimes they just don't understand the recipe. How to make it peaks. How high can you make egg whites peak? How long do you got to put it in the oven? What part of the oven should you put that in? There's just things to think about. Sandra says, we set out oven to 400 degrees regardless because our oven is a pain in the butt. Now, see, this is a point. You need to know your oven. If it is not working correctly, if it's cooler or if it's hotter, you need to know those things, because then it will stop you from having recipe mishaps. It's true. But But then there's things like there's plastic measuring cups, there's ceramic measuring cups, there's glass measuring cups. Same with teaspoons, tablespoons, all those. Now, some people are tried and true. All the liquids are going in the liquid or in the glass measuring cup. The dry stuff, they usually use their plastic ones. Do I think it makes any difference? No. I mean, if a recipe has to be that precise, I'm not making it. You might make it. I'm not making it. Because if it's such slight differences that recipe will not work out, I'm just not going to do it. I'm just not. Now, know your limitations. Have you been cooking, baking, broiling, barbecuing for a long time? Or are you new at it? So I think if you acknowledge, what are my abilities? What is it going to cost? What is the time involved? This can make a difference. So like if you were going to make a recipe that had a lot of ingredients. One, if a recipe has more than 10 ingredients, it is very unlikely that I'm ever going to make it. Two, if it's going to cost too much, I have to really weigh that. You know, maybe you want to impress people. They're coming to your house. It's a new recipe. One, don't serve things that you had never baked before to company. And if you do, never, ever apologize. I mean, you're taking your time, your expense, your money. If they have a problem with it, too bad. You know, you're doing your best. I just don't, you know, when I was younger, I would apologize. Oh, this doesn't taste as much good as I wanted it to. And then one day I thought, why am I doing that? I'm never doing that again. So I don't. And then like substitutions. A recipe has all this list of ingredients and maybe you don't have something. Like maybe you don't have buttermilk. You can add lemon juice to milk. Some people add vinegar to milk and count it as the buttermilk. Sometimes the recipe says brown sugar. Sometimes it says dark brown sugar. Seriously, would it really make that much difference if I only have light brown sugar and the recipe calls for dark brown sugar? I don't think it's going to make that big a difference. I don't think that makes a mishap. I think that's a choice that I'm just choosing to not go to the store and buy something that I'm only going to use for that recipe. I just find that silly. Barbara. How are you, Barbara? She says, hi all. Sorry, working on a project. Late to the live chat. Angie says that she started buying powdered buttermilk. So if she needed it, she had it on hand. I have to tell you what I used to do all the time. And not just me, some of my other friends too. Now, we're seniors now, so we can go to Senior Citizen Center for lunch. It's not expensive. They always have good stuff. And one of the things when they walk around, they offer you regular milk, chocolate milk, skim milk, and buttermilk. So every time I went there, I would get the little container of buttermilk. And that week, I would make stuff with that called for buttermilk. And otherwise, I didn't. Because I'm cheap sometimes. It was part of my meal, and it didn't cost me anything. And so I like it. Sandra says, we have powdered milk here. We went through a time when we didn't drink a lot of milk. Yes, powdered milk can work really well in a lot of recipes to substitute so that you don't have to have regular milk. Especially when a lot of people, like we always have whole milk, but a lot of people don't. And in a recipe, for the most part, you want to use whole milk because it gives it a richer flavor. Charlene is here. Hello, how are you? We're talking about recipe mishaps. What can go wrong? Like, say something is a little too spicy, a little too acidy. What would you do? Because you think all of a sudden, oh, I've ruined this recipe. It's a mishap. But there are things to do. A lot of times, just adding a fourth a cup of water to that dish and let it cook for a little while will fix that being too spicy or too acidy. Um, I think that, like, say your sauce is too thick, turn the temperature way down, add a little milk or add a little butter, and then you can stir that, and all of a sudden it's not a recipe mishap. Like, there are tricks with every recipe. Like, even when you buy processed food, say you bought french fries, frozen french fries in a bag, and you're going to cook them. Hello, young lady. How are ya? Oh, just you can always watch it again. We had some fun little things that mishaps that people had. I told a story about my strawberry shortcake mishap when I was young. Using salted butter instead of using unsalted butter. Well, I honestly, I'm only going to buy one kind of butter. And so when I'm baking with butter and the recipe calls for unsalted butter, when it has salt in the recipe, just add a little bit less. It will all work out fine. But back to the french fries. Because just because some of the things you buy for your dinner are not from scratch does not make you less of a cook. Let's just say it out loud. We don't have to do every single thing from scratch. It's true. I mean, and I like to do things from scratch. But like when I buy frozen french fries, okay, so what am I going to do first? I'm going to soak those french fries in water for a half hour. Then I'm just going to pat them dry a little bit, toss them with a little bit of oil, and put them in the oven. Then I'm not using a whole bunch of oil, which isn't good for you all the time. And it still gets that really good crunchy taste. In fact, you can soak them in salt water, and then you don't hardly have to use any salt at all. I like it. Sandra says, trust me, 1/16 of salt can change a recipe. Definitely. You know, like, don't add things till the end. Like, we talked about herbs, not adding them till the end. Lemons, not adding them to the end. Even the salt. Leave pepper completely out and put it on the table and let people pepper how they want it. Because that can make a big difference to a recipe too. If you're one of those cooks that really likes pepper and you're serving it to people that don't really care for that much pepper, it's just better to leave it on the table. Most of the population eat takeout only. There's probably a lot of people that eat out all the time. Joe and I, not so much, but a lot of people do. Stella says, I'm using Celtic salt now, and it is so much saltier than other salts. I use Celtic salt sometimes too. I have this gray Celtic salt. It is extremely great. But I do agree, it is more powerful. And like, I buy salt in big bags, my Himalayan salt, my Celtic salt, and then I just grind it in my coffee grinder as I need it. If it's a lot of liquid, you can use those bigger grains. But if it's not going to dissolve it around, all of a sudden you have these little crunches of salt, which can be overwhelming too. Sandra says, if you have salted butter when you need unsalted butter, your panettone is not going to work out. Interesting. See, these are just things that you learn from experience. But remember, always, there is no such thing as a foolproof recipe. Seriously, never gonna happen. Because things happen. Every oven is different. Every cook is different. Every stove is different. It's too hot, it's too cold, it's so much humidity, it's very dry. Everything affects what you cook. So just take your time, have your ingredients out, have your utensils ready. And if you question, like sometimes, especially in old cookbooks, I'll read a recipe, or not, I take that back, not even just in old cookbooks. I'll read a recipe and something just doesn't fit right to me. So I will look up other recipes for that same thing. And then I can't even tell you how many times I found that something was just written wrong. It was too much of this or not enough of this. And so I was always glad that I waited and did a little research before I took that time to bake or fry or broil all these different things. And if you don't know what something means in a recipe, you gotta look it up. Like, what does it mean to fold? What does it mean when bread needs to be elastic? What is parboiled? What is all these different terms? I got to show you my newest book. This is called The Oxford Companion to Food. It just came today. It's like an encyclopedia. It goes in alphabetical order. And it tells you about, like, I just opened it up, and it gives me the history of jelly. Who knew? The history of jelly. I like it. I got this used. I think I paid less than $5 for it. Free shipping. It was a deal, I tell you. But I'm going to let you guys go because I'm past a half hour. I made up hamburger patties. I'm going to cook for supper tonight, and I sprinkled a little bit of stuff on there, some garlic and stuff on there. So it should be yummy for Joe and I. And it is raining outside, so I'm going to cook them on the stove tonight. But don't worry if you have those recipe mishaps. It's going to happen to everybody. Just know that you can try again. You can change things. Jenny is here. Hello, Jenny. My mother was told to add a cup of mayonnaise with the moistest cake. She didn't say it was for a devil's food cake. As a 9-year-old, my first cake, an angel food cake, it was like a brick. Because you can add mayonnaise to a lot of different cakes, but angel food cake is a little bit different. That is awesome. See, I don't feel so bad about my strawberry shortcake story. And Glenda is here. Hello. Oh, BLTs. You know, I don't eat bacon, but I made myself some beef bacon. And on a BLT, it is just fabulous. Oh, to Yuma today because, you know, in the wintertime I go to Yuma, 103 degrees. Oh my gosh. That people do add vinegar to cakes too. Yeah. It's really interesting what different things will do to your recipe. So have fun with your recipes. Enjoy it. You know, switch up herbs. You know, maybe it says it wants oregano in the recipe, but maybe your family doesn't really care for oregano. Put basil in there. Put tarragon in there. Use a different herb. Have fun with it. Oh, I do love tarragon. And I didn't even know what tarragon was till I was probably 40 years old. And I've been a gardener, but I just never grew tarragon. I have this, I have both Russian tarragon and French tarragon. French, more flavorful, but both of them are good flavor. And it kind of gives it a licorice anise taste to different things. It is fabulous. The sky is the limit. Have fun with your recipes. If there's a mishap, just see what you might have done, or maybe what the recipe was written wrong. And sometimes it's just the wrong order. That, like, my secret to chocolate chip cookies is creaming the butter and the sugar together very well. It makes a whole difference of how that recipe turns out. And Craig is here. Look at all these people coming in, and it's past my 30 minutes. I cannot stay too long. And remember, Vineyard Chicks is up at 7 o'clock Mountain Standard Time. And Anne from Andel's Homestead has hers at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, as always, when she talks on Tuesday morning. So everybody have a great time. Oh, see, like Barbara doesn't use cumin. It's hard when I do Indian food. But find a spice that's, something that will give it a good flavor too. Because cumin can be overpowering, but there's other things that you can use. So everybody have a great night. I appreciate you stopping in, and I will see you next time. Bye, everybody.